Everything detonated with one announcement. One benching that made zero sense to fans, baffled the media, and sent shockwaves through the entire NFL. Shedeur Sanders, the rookie who was breaking records in merchandise sales, the player whose presence alone spiked national ratings, the quarterback who felt less like a prospect and more like a movement, was suddenly benched. Not for being injured, not for struggling, simply benched. Kevin Stefanski stood at the podium, poker-faced, and calmly declared that Dillon Gabriel would be the Browns' starting quarterback moving forward. No explanation, no timeline, no clarity. It was presented as business as usual. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a roster change. This was a bomb going off inside a city, a franchise, and maybe the entire league. Within seconds of the announcement, the tremors hit. Twitter exploded into chaos. Hashtag Free Shedeur lit up timelines. Fans vowed boycotts. Videos of Browns supporters burning jerseys went viral overnight. The outrage wasn't limited to Cleveland. It spread across the country, transforming into a cultural moment. People who rarely watched football were suddenly talking about the Browns, and not in a good way. Because this wasn't just about Sanders. It was about everything he represented. Youth, energy, culture, representation, marketability, and the future. By benching him, the Browns weren't just sitting a quarterback. They were essentially telling fans, "We don't care what you want. We don't care what excites you. We're sticking to our stubborn plan, no questions asked." But here's the part that made the decision truly catastrophic. Ticket prices cratered within hours. Season ticket holders flooded the team with refund demands. Retailers, who had just sold out Sanders jerseys weeks earlier, suddenly couldn't give Browns gear away. TV networks reportedly downgraded their ratings projections by millions. Broadcasters who had counted on Sanders' star power couldn't hide their frustration. One even joked, "We didn't pay billions to watch game managers dump the ball off." Fans at the stadium turned every disappointment into a protest chant. Kids were filmed crying, wearing flipped Sanders jerseys. Player families hinted at frustration online. Former legends publicly called the move a disgrace. By the next morning, Shedeur Sanders wasn't just a promising quarterback. He had become the symbol of everything the Browns were losing. That's why this story is bigger than a depth chart. It's a cautionary tale. One decision didn't just put a rookie on the bench. It fractured an organization, enraged a city, and set the NFL on edge. And if you think the initial backlash was bad, just wait until you hear what happened next. When Kevin Stefanski walked into the press room that afternoon, nobody expected fireworks. At worst, fans were bracing for more coach speak about evaluating players or staying the course. Instead, they got something far more nuclear. With a steady, unreadable expression, Stefanski calmly announced, "Dillon Gabriel will be our starting quarterback moving forward." That was it. No context, no warning, no explanation for why the quarterback who had become the face of Cleveland overnight, Shedeur Sanders, suddenly didn't have a seat at the table. The silence in the room was as loud as anything. And then pounced. Did Sanders struggle in practice? Was he hurt? Did discipline play a role? Each question met with the same flat, evasive replies. Team decision. Best for now. Gives us the best chance to win. Stefanski had chosen his hill, and he stood firmly on it. But outside that press room, the league caught fire. Within minutes, Twitter feeds detonated. The hashtag #FreeShedeur began climbing trends not just in Cleveland, but across the country. By nightfall, it was global. TikTok was flooded with highlight clips of Sanders captioned with disbelief. YouTube creators dropped angry reaction breakdowns. Even casual fans, the ones who might watch football occasionally but tuned in for Sanders' story, lined up to bash the move. Cleveland supporters, already on edge, they felt betrayed. This wasn't some undrafted rookie with nothing to show for himself. This was the quarterback who had sold out merchandise faster than any player in the league, including established superstars. This was the kid whose arrival had spiked television viewership, whose presence made the Browns suddenly look like appointment TV. And now, he was gone from the lineup, benched without reason. The reaction wasn't limited to fans. Brands who had just tied themselves to the Sanders wave started sweating publicly. One major sporting goods chain reportedly froze orders of Sanders jerseys, unsure if demand would crater. Local retailers, who had been swimming in profits, now faced the ugly reality of customers bringing merchandise back. The cash register that Sanders represented for Cleveland, it slammed shut. Even TV executives, normally careful about words, were fuming privately. One source was quoted saying, "We didn't schedule 3 Browns primetime games to watch Gabriel hand off 30 times. We wanted Sanders. The whole world wanted Sanders." In the locker room, whispers immediately began leaking out. Players were stunned. Some shook their heads, others bit their tongues. But the consensus was clear. The young quarterback they believed could electrify a team had just been pulled off the field. Not by play, not by injury, but by a stubborn decision. In that single press conference, Stefanski didn't just shuffle a depth chart. He lit a match and dropped it in a room filled with oil. And over the coming days, that fire would spread past football, past Cleveland, and threaten to torch the NFL's financial core. Because this wasn't only about who played quarterback. It was about what happens when a franchise openly chooses tradition and control over its brightest star. And soon, the fallout would hit like a landslide. Cleveland fans are not strangers to heartbreak. They've seen defeats, missed field goals, draft busts, and coaching carousels. But nothing lit the fuse of outrage like the benching of Shedeur Sanders. Overnight, what should have been just another Sunday lineup choice turned into a full-scale fan rebellion and financial disaster that spread far beyond the stadium walls. The first signs came in the resale market. Less than 24 hours after the benching announcement, ticket prices collapsed. Listings that once commanded premium dollars evaporated, and StubHub reported a 70% drop in value. Season ticket holders, many of whom had renewed back when the team was blasting Sanders' face across every email and billboard, began calling the front office demanding refunds. Some even threatened lawsuits, citing false advertising. Inside the stadium, the most loyal fans turned their frustration into protest. The iconic dog pound, usually a sea of unwavering energy, quickly became a stage for dissent. Instead of barking and waving signs for touchdowns, they raised banners reading "Free Shedeur" and booed every conservative play call. At one game, cameras caught entire rows of fans with paper bags over their heads, a grim visual echo of the franchise's darkest days. The impact wasn't limited to game day. Cleveland's economic heartbeat, the local businesses who ride the wave of game week, felt the fallout immediately. Bars reported 40% revenue drops during Sundays. Tailgate organizers canceled events, and pre-game foot traffic around the stadium slowed to a crawl. The once legendary municipal lot, famous for its rowdy tailgate culture, looked eerily empty. Cleveland hadn't just lost its quarterback, it was losing its atmosphere. Then came the merchandising disaster. Sanders' jersey, which had recently outsold stars like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, suddenly became a liability. Big chains like Dick's Sporting Goods put a pause on reorders, fearful they'd be stuck with inventory nobody wanted. Local sports shops panicked, marking Sanders gear at clearance prices and still struggling to move it. Online retailers who just weeks earlier couldn't keep #2Sanders jerseys in stock were now slashing prices. One retailer admitted sales had dropped. Broadcasters, too, started calculating losses. According to insiders, networks like ESPN and Fox trimmed their projected viewership numbers by millions. Suddenly, Cleveland's primetime slots looked like dead air. One anonymous television executive reportedly quipped, "We didn't pay billions for 3 years of Browns games to watch Dylan Gabriel check down 5 yards at a time." It was a domino effect. Fans angry, businesses hurting, retailers choking on inventory, networks panicking. The spotlight that Sanders had brought, the hope, the excitement, the generational buzz, disappeared the moment he was benched. And in today's NFL, star power isn't just nice to have. It's the fuel that keeps the entire multi-billion-dollar machine running. By opting to sideline their most marketable player, the Browns hadn't just made themselves less dangerous on the— And quickly, the tremors of revolt inside the fan base were matched by something even more dangerous: a fracture inside their own locker room. In the NFL, locker rooms live on belief. Players can endure tough losses, grueling practices, and even controversial coaching calls, as long as they believe their team has a plan worth following. But when that faith collapses, so does everything else. And after Stefanski's benching announcement, Cleveland's locker room began cracking from within. It started with the whispers. Veterans exchanged side-eyed looks in practice. Receivers grumbled under their breath when Gabriel underthrew them on timing routes. Defensive leaders, already drained from watching stagnant offensive drives, quietly vented about wasted potential. In private, one lineman said what everyone was starting to think. "We slogged through camp, watched this kid torch us in practice, and the coaches still won't play him? Makes no sense." Those whispers snowballed quickly. A leadership council of captains and respected vets scheduled closed-door meetings without coaches. That detail mattered. Normally, leadership councils exist to strengthen communication with staff. This time, players were creating their own alternative reality. They openly discussed Sanders, comparing his practice brilliance to the sluggish efficiency of Gabriel. Offensive players admitted they felt flat when Gabriel was under center, while defensive guys confirmed they saw something special in Sanders, something obvious. The frustration wasn't subtle anymore. According to insiders, multiple players approached Stefanski and his staff privately. The answers they got, variations of development and timeline, rang hollow. Players didn't buy abstract coaching philosophies, they bought results. And what they'd been seeing was a young quarterback who made the offense dangerous every single time he touched the ball. Meanwhile, Gabriel couldn't hide the toll. His body language screamed discomfort. Teammates noticed how isolated he'd become in the locker room. What should have been his biggest opportunity was instead an unwinnable battle against fan hostility, media vitriol, and teammates' doubts. One receiver put it bluntly, "You can feel he knows he's not the guy." And the worst part is, it's not even his fault. Shedeur Sanders, in contrast, leaned further into professionalism. Instead of sulking, he stayed after practice to run extra reps with receivers and volunteering extra film sessions. Veterans saw it. They respected it. It wasn't just his arm or swagger. It was the attitude, the accountability. That's how rookies win over locker rooms faster than coaches, by outworking and outleading everyone else. By week's end, it wasn't just fans chanting in the stands. Inside the Browns' own facility, the momentum had flipped. Veterans who had seen countless quarterbacks cycle through Cleveland, the same players who normally stay loyal to the coach's word, were beginning to side with the rookie. Not outwardly, not in front of cameras, but in subtle signs. More players showing up to Sanders' extra sessions, likes piling up on social media posts hinting at support, an undercurrent of defiance against the coaching staff's stubborn narrative. The unthinkable had happened. The locker room itself was starting to fracture against its own leadership. And when players begin to revolt, not through loud protests, but through subtle loyalty shifts, you know a season isn't just in jeopardy. It's already slipping away. But the backlash wasn't finished. If anything, it was only accelerating. Because as the players whispered behind closed doors, the media and culture at large began shouting the same message day and night. If fan protests rattled the Browns and player whispers shook the locker room, what happened next nearly collapsed the entire organizational foundation. The national media descended on Cleveland like vultures circling a carcass, and they weren't subtle about it. Every sports outlet turned Sanders' benching into a marquee storyline. ESPN led off morning shows with slow-motion highlights of him standing stoically on the sideline, helmet in hand, looking more ready than the man actually playing. FS1 spent whole segments mocking the Browns for self-sabotage. Talk radio across the country echoed the same sentiment. This wasn't development, this was dysfunction. And then the conversation grew beyond football. Sanders wasn't just a rookie quarterback, he was a cultural figure. The son of Deion Prime Sanders, steeped in charisma, loved by younger demographics, and fluent in social media the way old-school QBs never were. To Gen Z fans, he wasn't a player, he was their guy. The one who spoke their language, grew up in their culture, and carried a brand that blended sports, entertainment, and personality seamlessly. Which is why the optics of his benching became catastrophic. Pundits pointed out the obvious. The young black quarterback with generational talent and marketability had been pulled in favor of a safe, traditional pocket. Shannon Sharp said bluntly. Michael Irvin took it further, questioning whether the league fully understood how damaging suppressing a figure like Sanders looked in 2023. On social media, Black Twitter erupted. Memes, hashtags, and threads tore the decision apart, not just as a football move, but as a reflection of something deeper about who gets opportunities and who doesn't. Coach Prime himself stayed quiet in public, but according to insiders, boiled in private. Sources claimed he reached out directly to Browns executives to demand clarity. The Sanders family is more than a brand, it's an empire. And when you threaten that empire by sidelining its brightest young star, you risk a battle far bigger than anything happening on a football field. Sponsors certainly realized it. Companies like Nike, State Farm, and Dot. And Progressive, brands that had all tied themselves to the Sanders orbit, reportedly paused campaigns or recalibrated contracts. Nobody wanted to bet their marketing dollars on a player the Browns refused to play. One Cleveland sponsor flatly withdrew their deal, furious at the optics. And the fallout wasn't limited to ads. The NFL itself grew nervous. Behind the scenes, league executives knew Sanders wasn't just good for Cleveland, he was vital for the product. He boosted ratings among younger fans, drew in casual viewers, and created cultural buzz that most franchises couldn't dream of manufacturing. His benching represented more than team control. It represented lost momentum for the entire league. Media voices hammered Stefanski daily, with Stephen A. Smith blasting him as tone-deaf. Should Sanders start? They were asking, what is wrong with the Browns? At that point, it was impossible to deny. The story had exploded. Sanders wasn't just a benched rookie anymore. He was a national symbol of blocked potential, corporate fallout, and cultural rejection. And as pressure mounted, whispers began leaking that even the NFL commissioner himself was now personally calling the Browns. Because if Cleveland thought this was just a local controversy, they were about to learn. This storm was global. When the uproar spread from fans and media into corporate boardrooms, the NFL could still spin the narrative as heated debate. But when the crisis entered league headquarters, it evolved into something else entirely: panic. Commissioner Roger Goodell reportedly phoned Browns ownership within 48 hours of the announcement. And that call, according to insiders, was not friendly. Goodell emphasized Sanders' importance to the league's outreach, especially to younger demographics, international markets, and casual fans who had only tuned into Browns games because Sanders was on the field. The commissioner rarely singles out individual players, but this wasn't about one quarterback. It was about protecting the NFL's billion-dollar brand ecosystem. Ownership responded stiffly, defending their right to football autonomy. Haslam's camp insisted coaching decisions belonged to the staff, not the league office. But Goodell didn't leave it there. Rumors swirled that he considered unprecedented options, ranging from public recommendations to, at the extreme, forcing organizational changes if the boycott intensified. While no official ultimatum was given, the very fact that those scenarios were leaked signaled how desperate the league had become. And then things got worse. Sportsbooks began flagging suspicious betting patterns from just days before Shedeur's benching was revealed. Large sums poured in against Cleveland, as if someone had inside knowledge that the team was about to implode offensively. Regulators noticed. The whispers of gambling scandal hit headlines almost instantly, feeding an already toxic story. Imagine the optics. Benching your most electric rookie, not just upsetting fans, but potentially lining someone's pockets. Even the suggestion of impropriety sent shudders through league corridors. These betting irregularities elevated the situation from a messy quarterback controversy to a potential legal storm. The Securities and Exchange Commission reportedly tracked the spikes, with talk of federal investigators circling. Over the next week, an insider manipulation. No one could prove anything yet, but in a league still scarred by the memory of betting scandals past, the perception alone could be lethal. As the scandals stacked up, politicians started circling too. Cleveland's mayor allegedly called Haslam to warn about the franchise's economic impact. Shrinking ticket sales, canceled hotel bookings, and local business losses. State representatives spoke publicly about reviewing stadium funding, asking why taxpayers should support an organization alienating its own fan base. The deeper the controversy dug, the more stakeholders, governmental or corporate, were dragged into the mess. Inside NFL offices, presentations reportedly began circulating with grim metrics. Massive merchandise drop-offs, hundreds of millions in potential TV rating losses. One high-ranking executive bluntly stated, "We didn't build this empire for one coach to tank it in a month." And looming over it all was the unspoken threat. If the NFL didn't intervene, fans might not just tune out the Browns. They might walk away from the league itself. Cleveland wanted to frame this as football autonomy. But by now, the story wasn't about autonomy. It was about survival. And the league quietly prepared for its next move, knowing silence was no longer an option. By the time Dillon Gabriel actually stepped onto the field as Cleveland's starter, the stadium atmosphere already felt toxic. What should have been cheers for a quarterback getting his big opportunity instead turned into a wall of boos, audible groans, and chants for the player forbidden to step in, Shedeur Sanders. Every incompletion felt heavier than the stat sheet. Every safe, conservative checkdown call was met with groan. And it wasn't just in the stadium. Across Cleveland's football-mad community, the fallout was everywhere. The Dog Pound, once the rowdy heartbeat of game day, organized a walkout in the third quarter. Thousands of fans streamed toward the exits in coordinated fashion, cameras catching rivers of orange jerseys disappearing into the concourse long before the final whistle. The message wasn't subtle. Fans weren't just disappointed, they were done. Social media turned the exodus into a viral moment. Clips of empty seats, chants for Sanders, and jersey burnings dominated TikTok and Instagram. One particularly gut-punching video showed a 7-year-old boy asking through tears why his favorite player wasn't allowed to play. That clip alone drew over 15 million views in less than a day. The Browns weren't just fighting bad press. They were cementing themselves as villains in a cultural moment. Meanwhile, the players felt the weight. Teammates openly admitted it was nearly impossible to focus during the games. Receivers grew visibly frustrated after routes ended in missed opportunities. Defensive leaders, who were doing their jobs, privately asked why they were wasting their efforts fueling an offense that couldn't score. Sources leaked that several veterans confronted Stefanski directly, demanding an explanation. The answers they got, variations of "development takes patience," sounded hollow, even insulting. From fantasy football owners to sportsbooks, the spiral accelerated. Analytics departments openly mocked the Browns' decision. Sportsbooks slashed Cleveland's season win totals, and fantasy platforms reported the lowest usage of Browns' offensive players in decades. For bettors, gamers, and casual fans alike, Cleveland had gone from intriguing to irrelevant overnight. The spiral, once started, showed no signs of slowing. Every week Sanders sat, the crowds grew quieter, the boos louder, and the locker room more fractured. For the Browns, it wasn't just losing games, it was losing belief. In football, that's the deadliest deficit of all. And while dysfunction consumed the field and the stands, the real storm was forming outside the lines, because Sanders himself was quickly becoming more than a player. He was becoming a symbol. What made the controversy remarkable wasn't just the outrage. It was that the man at the center of it, Shedeur Sanders, refused to fuel the fire. While fans screamed, media blasted, and teammates vented, Sanders kept his composure. And in doing so, he became something larger than a quarterback. He became a symbol. Television feeds caught him countless times on the sideline during games, standing with his helmet in hand, calm and controlled. Cameras zoomed in, hoping to catch signs of bitterness, rolling eyes, slammed helmets, angry words. But they never got it. Instead, what fans saw was Sanders clapping teammates on the back after drives, nodding to the defense after big plays, encouraging his receivers, even though he wasn't throwing to them. That stoic professionalism became iconic. The clips spread instantly across social media. TikToks showing Sanders' calm demeanor were cut with captions like, "The QB we deserve, but don't get to watch." Instagram Reels painted him as the silent leader, carrying his team even without being allowed on the field. On Twitter, players from other teams chimed in, not just rookies, but stars. Patrick Mahomes posted Sanders' highlights with a flame emoji. Josh Allen tweeted simply, "Let him play." Even Tom Brady, famously careful with commentary, hinted that the best players always need to be on the field. The solidarity was unmistakable. Sanders wasn't just a player stuck on the bench. He was an injustice too obvious to ignore. And the brand only grew. Ironically, while the Browns kept him benched, corporate America kept betting on him. His follower counts on Instagram and TikTok exploded. Engagement metrics spiked higher than those of many established NFL starters. Companies recognized the value, even off the field. Nike and State Farm included him in marketing rollouts without flinching, because millions cared more about Sanders' story than Gabriel's stats. To Gen Z and casual fans, Sanders wasn't missing. He was everywhere. Inside the team facility, his professionalism resonated with teammates. Sanders showed up earlier than almost anyone, stayed later, and ran extra drills with wideouts and tight ends after practice. Those voluntary reps, repeated daily, built chemistry even if game day never gave him the chance to show it. Veterans quietly admired the maturity. In private conversations, defensive leaders reportedly told coaches that Sanders already felt like the face of the team. If fans were outraged and owners were calculating losses, the locker room increasingly looked at Sanders not just as an option, but as the guy, the one who carried himself like a leader, even when stripped of the role. It was a strange paradox. The more the Browns resisted putting him on the field, the more powerful Sanders became. His myth grew each week. His reputation strengthened without a snap. And when someone becomes more valuable not playing than the starter does playing, you know you're no longer dealing with depth charts. You're dealing with symbolism. Sanders wasn't just a quarterback anymore. He was Cleveland's message to the world about stubbornness, about wasted potential, about change denied. And that symbolism was about to collide with an even bigger problem: the total collapse of an organization that couldn't hold itself together. By week 4, the crisis was no longer just a football story. It had become a franchise-wide implosion, dragging down everything connected to the Cleveland Browns. What started with a single benching decision now looked like the organizational equivalent of pulling the wrong Jenga block. Suddenly, the tower was crashing in slow motion for everyone to see. Season ticket holders led the first wave of collapse. Hundreds filed formal refund requests, some even threatening lawsuits. They pointed to marketing flyers and renewal emails that had been plastered with Sanders' image just months earlier. To them, they'd been sold a product that no longer existed. Angry fans showed up at team offices with contracts in hand, daring the Browns to explain how they hadn't been duped. Then came the sponsors. Progressive Insurance, headquartered just outside Cleveland, reportedly froze its Browns promotions under heavy public pressure. Other brands followed. National advertisers, already nervous about being associated with the toxic optics, started activating exit clauses in their contracts. Stadium signage contracts were suspended. Local businesses near the stadium, restaurants, parking lots, bars, saw sharp declines in sales and quietly blamed the Browns for sabotaging their own foot traffic. It didn't stop there. The locker room, already fracturing, reached a breaking point. Veterans tired of tight losses and endless boos confronted Stefanski for answers, only to be met with the same vague developmental timeline responses. According to insiders, several players stormed out of film study sessions, openly questioning whether the coaching staff's stubbornness was deliberately sabotaging their efforts. Trade rumors suddenly swirled, not about average players, but stars like Amari Cooper reportedly asking for a way out. For a team that once pitched itself as building something sustainable, nothing now looked sustainable at all. The financial bleeding accelerated too. Jersey sales cratered. Economics analysts projected 9-figure revenue losses for the city if boycotts continued into the postseason. Hotels and event vendors reported cancellations. Even the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a Cleveland institution, claimed attendance had dipped on game weekends, once dominated by out-of-town fans. The decision to bench Sanders wasn't just wrecking a roster, it was wrecking the local economy. To make matters worse, minority owners in the Browns investment group began quietly breaking ranks. Sources claimed several had demanded emergency meetings with league officials, questioning Haslam's leadership, and openly discussing whether it was time to force a sale. That kind of fracture is usually whispered behind closed doors. The fact that it was leaking at all proved how radioactive the situation had become. By this stage, even the league office couldn't ignore it. Ratings for Browns games tanked to historic lows, and primetime partners begged to flex Cleveland out of national slots. Executives in New York compiled charts showing how Sanders boosted demographics, especially with younger and international audiences, and how Gabriel's starts caused those same charts to nosedive. One executive reportedly muttered, "This isn't just bad, it's existential." Cleveland had crossed a point of no return. The Sanders benching had started as one coach's stubborn hill to stand on, but now it had snowballed into lawsuits, sponsor withdrawals, collapsing ticket sales, broken locker rooms, and a city economy on edge. The Browns weren't just losing games anymore. They were losing their identity, their reputation, and, piece by piece, the very foundation of their franchise. In professional sports, mistakes happen every week. Missed kicks, mistakes, and so on. Blown assignments, draft picks that don't pan out. But what happened in Cleveland wasn't just a mistake. It was a self-inflicted wound so deep that it bled across an entire city, spilled into the economy, poisoned a locker room, and shook confidence in the league itself. The decision to bench Shedeur Sanders wasn't about performance. It wasn't about health. It wasn't even about football. It was about control. A head coach clinging to a philosophy, refusing to bend even as reality screamed for flexibility. Ownership let it stand, and the NFL watched in horror as one personnel decision spiraled into one of the most costly controversies in the league's modern history. Think about the ripple effect. Ticket sales cratered, jersey sales tanked, and entire businesses in Cleveland saw game day revenue vanish. Corporate sponsors pulled out, national advertisers hit pause, and broadcast partners openly reshuffled coverage because the one player who had electrified audiences was nowhere to be seen. When primetime networks start panicking and local restaurants go under because of a football decision, you've got something far bigger than a QB controversy. You've got organizational malpractice. And then there's the locker room. Players don't shout their dissatisfaction in front of cameras often, but you could feel it in the way veterans spoke, in the subtle endorsements of Sanders, in the growing frustration that hard work on defense and offense was being wasted. Trust fractured. Belief evaporated. And without belief, no NFL team can function. Yet, through all of it, Sanders himself became more than a rookie. By maintaining composure, lifting teammates, and handling adversity with dignity, he transformed from an exciting young quarterback into something symbolic. He became the face of suppressed talent, of wasted potential, of a system that too often bows to ego instead of performance. His silence carried more impact than his words ever could. That symbolism stretched beyond Cleveland. It seeped into culture, sparking conversations about opportunity, optics, and the power of fan influence. It fueled hashtags, protests, and boycotts. It reminded the entire sports industry of the dangerous consequences that come when you sideline the very people your fans have come to see. So what's the lasting lesson? It isn't simply play the better quarterback. It's this: professional sports don't survive without stars, without belief, without accountability to the people who invest their time, money, and passion. Ego cannot outweigh talent. Politics cannot erase performance. And stubbornness cannot be allowed to torch everything built around a game that millions love. Cleveland's saga is going to be taught in sports management courses, dissected in documentaries, and remembered by every executive who ever dares to place pride above reality. A single decision turned a promising renaissance into a cautionary tale, a flashing warning sign for leagues everywhere. Because in the NFL, there's one truth that can never be benched: talent always wins. Ignore that, and you don't just lose games. You lose everything.